All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for Through Another Lens. My name is Amy Brundle. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at NAMI NC, and I have the privilege of being your moderator today. We initiated this panel discussion as part of our recognition of Minority Mental Health Month, which was made an official National Awareness Month in 2008, thanks to the tireless efforts of Bebe Moore Campbell from LA. Minority Mental Health Month is designed to bring awareness to the unique mental health challenges, stigma, and barriers to care that underserved communities face. NAMI is dedicated to inclusivity, empathy, and understanding while striving for more equitable and culturally competent approaches to mental health support and care. Before we get started today, I did want to thank the North Carolina Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities and Substance Abuse Services for sponsoring this webinar through the Federal Community Mental Health Services Block Grant Fund. And we appreciate their guidance and support. So I'd like to welcome our panelists today, Lorraine Childs, who is a member of the Board of Directors at NAMI Durham, Sierra Cobb, who is an advocate with Emancipate NC, Linda Lee, who is a student at Duke University Medical School and member of the United Chinese Americans WAVES projects, and Amanda Hubert-Lopera, a member of the NAMI NC Board of Directors and the founder of Sunrise Amanacer Services. So as we get started today, I just want to have everyone describe introduce yourselves a little bit and describe what kind of connection you have to the mental health space, whether you're a provider, you're a peer, or you're an advocate. And all of us are advocates, but just give us a little idea of kind of how you got introduced to the mental health space and what your connection is there. And I think Lorraine, we'll start with you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lorraine Childs, and I am, as you said, I'm an advocate for mental health, and I'm also the mother of a daughter who has a diagnosed mental health condition, which brought me into the connection with mental health and the introduction to NAMI.
Excellent, thank you. Sierra, what about you?
Hi, my name is Sierra Cobb, and I am the Prison Jail Coordinator and Family Advocate for Emancipate NC. And I work a lot with people that are incarcerated and a big mental health advocate for incarceration and in society. I actually have complex PTSD that has manifested seizures. So I have been in the mental health world for a while now. So just trying to advocate for better mental health.
Excellent, thank you. Linda?
Hi everyone, I'm Linda. I'm a fourth year medical student at Duke. I plan to apply into psychiatry, so I will be a future provider in this area. I'm also a youth ambassador for United Chinese Americans WAVES, which is a youth mental health initiative focused on AAPI youth, or Asian American and Pacific Islander youth. So in that way, I've been a mental health advocate. And then I also have, personal experiences with mental illness as well, running in my family, as well as a friend who did pass away, unfortunately, from suicide 8 years ago. So bringing all of those experiences together.
Absolutely. And then Amanda.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Hubert-Lopera. I am a mental health provider. I'm a therapist in North Carolina for the past 10 years. I'm the founder of Sunrise Amanacer, which is a mental health practice dedicated to more diverse populations with a focus on the Latinx community. I have lived experience. I have family experience kind of dealing with mental health issues. I had an uncle who was diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was 19, and he had just kind of gotten into this country, and just noticing some of the barriers in him being able to access care that existed because of language barriers or because of just kind of access issues is what led me down the path of studying social work. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. No, we're grateful for all of you guys being here today. So I really want to just start off our conversation by recognizing that we've obviously got a wide variety of backgrounds on this panel. That was deliberate. And I'd love to hear about some of your experiences growing up in your various cultural influences. What were primarily some of the messages that you might have received as children or young adults about mental health or resilience or asking for help that you came across in your families or communities? And Sierra, why don't we start with you this time?
Well, in my community, mental health is kind of a blur. It's kind of, I guess, chalked up to you just have to get through it and get past it, not really process it and understand what's happening and understand what you're feeling. So mental health wasn't really talked about when I was younger. I mean, I heard about, depression probably because of school, being in health education in school. But as far as it being talked about in my community, it was never talked about. We just basically chalked it up and kept it moving.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have that experience. Linda, what about you?
Yeah, so I identify as Chinese American, so I can mostly just speak on sort of my reflections being a second generation Chinese American. And I think similar to Sierra, I think a lot of the sort of experiences that many Asian Americans in general, but speaking specifically as a Chinese American, I think it's very similar in the sense like that, mental illness is something that you just need to get through, kind of, or it's very much stigmatized within Asian American communities overall. There's a sort of perception that silence is strength, or keeping silent about, your mental health struggles is a sign of showing strength. And I think that in particular relates a lot to our sort of cultural values of collectivism. So thinking about like the community or the family as a whole and what brings harmony to the whole family or to the whole community. And how if you were to talk about your mental health struggles in a way that might quote unquote lose face for your family, or sort of like decrease your family or your community social standing in comparison to others. And so I think that's a huge barrier in general. I think there are also multiple other factors that sort of exacerbate that as well. Like our sort of, there's like a model minority myth as well that sort of views Asian Americans as kind of the minority that has succeeded, is wealthy, prosperous, and intelligent. And I think all of those sorts of perceptions combined make it really challenging for people who look and identify the same way as I do to seek mental health services in the end.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the silence is strength, because I think that's a message that a lot of us receive. Amanda, what about you?
So I identify as Colombian American, first gen, and kind of working with the community that I work with and having that lived experience. What I have noticed in our community is that we just like there's a focus on like orgullo, which is like pride. Like we're not going to deal with that because that makes us look like we are weak. So like I'm just going to deal with it. I'm just going to deal with it. I'm just going to deal with it. It's going to pile up. And because I dealt with it by not dealing with it, my children have to deal with it by not dealing with it, because that's what we have always done. And if you do break down, if you do cry, one, you're wasting time because we have to keep moving. It is very much like a trauma response. And a lot of Latin America has been through trauma, through pain, kind of historically, whatever has happened in your country of origin that made you come to this country, that made you do whatever, and what you experienced in terms of racism, or in terms of not knowing the language, in terms of your degrees not transferring over because you are from a Latin American country and you just have to start all over. All of those things are just kind of kept, you like lo tragas, you just like suck it up and you just keep going, and that gets translated to your child. I had to deal with it, you deal with it, or I'm strong. That kid is now just not even necessarily told, hey, Like mom's never cried, dad's never cried. They've never shown any other emotion other than just getting it done. I'm not allowed to have the struggles that I have. I'm not allowed to have depression. If I'm depressed, then I'm lazy. If I'm anxious about something, well, it's because your mind isn't occupied doing the things that you have to do. Ponte a limpiar, go clean something, go do something. That's how I've noticed it in my community. And it's just kind of turns into a failure of the parent if the parent really does say like, oh, wow, my kid is struggling with depression. I must have done a terrible job as a parent. And it goes into just like a snowball effect for the whole family. So that's why silence ends up happening in the Latinx community.
Lorraine,
Yeah.
what are your experiences here?
Yeah, it's kind of the same as everyone else on the panel. Growing up, we didn't, hear about mental health or in the family. And if someone did have depression, same as Amanda, you was considered lazy, unmotivated, um, and no one addressed it as depression. It was like shake it off, get up, whatever it is, get over it and move on. There's no time for this. And as time, as I got older, my family in particular, I think haven't got a hold of mental health. Um, and I tell people when I tell my story, unfortunately for me, growing up not believing in mental health, it poured over into my adulthood, and I didn't. I started feeling like mental health was just something people used as a crutch, you know, until it hit home, with my daughter, and I began to do my research, and I said, okay, this is real. This is like a disease, it's real. So I think because we're afraid of the stigma attached to mental health, we rather push it to the side and call it something else
Mm.
because we're afraid what people are going to say or think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as we kind of look beyond our own experiences to the broader community, we know that no group of people is a monolith or fits under one, umbrella. But I'm wondering if some of these messages are ones that are they were kind of shared with and we've touched on this a little bit, but shared with your broader cultural community, or if there was a spectrum of attitudes that you've encountered, or were people pretty much kind of in the same box, so to speak. Let's start with, let's have Linda start this one.
Yeah, I do think that some of the perspectives that I shared earlier have been pretty uh are pretty much throughout the Asian American community in general. I have started noticing a difference though over the last maybe decade or so, as I think mental health has become something that is more talked about, especially in terms of the intergenerational sort of perspective between like first generation parents who immigrated from other countries with their second generation children who often are coming in with a variety of very different experiences. And I think overall, I think it's been kind of hopeful now thinking about it, in the sense that like I think a lot of parents now are willing to talk about it, and are willing to gain a better understanding. But I also see like other parents as well doing the kind of the exact opposite, where they're like, oh, like why can't you, just get better? Like we went through so much stuff and so many horrible things when we were young. Like we went through the Cultural Revolution, we went through the Vietnam War, etc. Like we made it past that. Why can't you make it past that? So I still see like a lot of sort of stagnation in that sense, but overall kind of a positive trend, I think.
Great. That's awesome to hear. Amanda, what about your community? You touched on it a little bit, but I was wondering if you could broaden
Yeah.
what we were.
So, as kind of like the community as a whole, I think that what I'm noticing is that as children are getting the help, they're actually starting to help heal their parents.
Mm.
These kind of conversations where it's like, hey, did you realize that like doing this isn't actually necessary? Like we don't have to suffer in this way. We don't have to have these certain experiences in the same way. And I see families healing in that way. I also see that with families that have historically had higher educational achievement, they take more seriously some of these issues around mental health and really look at social emotional learning as something that is really important in their lives. So those are two things that I have recognized in the community, and just kind of like there's the cultural encapsulation that also happens where like you're able to take, like in Spanish, the music that is the saddest music you can ever imagine, the most distressing lyrics, you can still dance to them. So there is this tendency to put a happy spin on things that can be really helpful at times, but it is a dance very much.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like Linda said, like there's a trend towards something better, but there's still some stuff that's left back in some older ways of thinking.
Right. Lorraine, Sierra, what have you guys noticed?
Well, as we can see from the panel, that a mental health condition, it doesn't discriminate. Okay, it doesn't discriminate against race, color, gender, sorry, or our identity. But and anyone can experience the challenge of mental illness regardless of their background. However, the background and identity can make getting access to mental health treatment more difficult. And I'm going to say that the lack of information and misconception surrounding mental health issues, it prevents many people of the African American community from getting the help and support that they need. And one reason also is that is not enough um, mental health behavior providers that look like us. Um, and that kind of keep, a lot of African Americans from seeking that help because it's like, you don't understand me,
Mm.
you know. So I think that's the biggest thing in our community.
Yeah. Do you agree, Sierra?
Yeah, it's really not enough of us out there to supplement the amount of mental health that African Americans are experiencing. Now, I do believe the conversation of mental health and people really understanding that somebody's suffering from trauma, built up trauma, whether it's ancestral trauma, childhood trauma, adult trauma, whatever trauma that you have. I do believe that it's being more talked about because we see more and more African Americans are being shot by police when they're having a mental health episode.
Mhm.
So I think that is opening our eyes to say, hey, we got to start dealing with this because we're the ones getting shot. When somebody's having a mental health issue and the family really doesn't know how to address it because we never addressed it, especially the older
Right.
generations, in slavery, they had to go through so much. So they just had to suck it up and do what they had to do
Mhm.
to survive and take care of their families. And so we never had no time to process that. And it goes from generation to generation, but I think that there is more attention to it. But as far as being able to get the actual help, we're still a long way away from that in the African American community.
Yeah. Well, we've already touched on some of the barriers of care, but I'm hoping we can spend a couple more minutes on discussing some of that, some of the other factors, whether they be financial or social or historical, like you mentioned, that might hinder a person of color or a person in an underserved community from recognizing or seeking mental health treatment. And Amanda, why don't we start with you since you're kind of right there on the provider side. Have you seen these barriers of care?
Yes. That's the short answer. When it comes to just documentation status, someone's access to healthcare, someone's access to language appropriate resources, language appropriate clinicians. It is one thing to have an interpreter for a appointment saying, hey, these are the basic things. It's a whole other thing to have an interpreter interpret what is going on with your mental health and really evaluate what is happening. It is a job that is like 3 times as difficult because there are nuances, there are different ways that other people understand the language, there are variances between different states, different countries, that make it really difficult to have a full and robust conversation. And also you have a third person in a conversation about something that's really, really difficult, that you oftentimes don't want to share with anybody. So those are some of the major ones, especially like status in the country. Like if you are undocumented, you have less of a likelihood of having access to any sort of resource that can cover your mental health treatment. So you are paying out of pocket when you are like, everything is like 5 times as expensive and you have less opportunities to have good paying jobs. It is a huge deterrent for people to seek treatment.
Lorraine, do you have other barriers of care that you've experienced? Yeah.
No, I would basically piggyback off of Amanda and say, it's an insurance issue, and people just, especially in low income communities, have trouble just finding that, that help and getting the resources that they need. And then it's also a trust issue. If I go in and I begin to tell how I feel and what I'm going through, or they're gonna find some way to turn it around and you know put me away, or it's a bunch of things that um we have to get better at making people feel safe and confident and seeking help, you know, because now, especially since COVID, it seems like it's just magnifying out here. Like it's just everything is really just coming to surface now. And if we don't get people to see that they need to seek help and it's okay to say, I'm not okay. And it's okay to let them know that you're not alone. Um, we're we I don't know. I just can't see it getting better if we don't speak up.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, I know you
Mhm.
deal with a population that is used to facing a lot of barriers when they're trying to get restarted in society. Can you expand a little on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, especially with like just the shift of Medicaid eligibility when you're coming home from
Yeah.
incarceration. It's hard to get anything. It's really hard. I mean, sometimes it's hard to get an ID, let alone trying to go and get mental health as soon as you come home, because we know there's really no mental health offered inside of incarceration. So just being able to get the health care, to access care, and then to trying to find the right provider that you feel like is going to listen to you, understand you, and not just have you in there for 10, 15 minutes, because for one, you are on Medicaid. And so sometimes there's a time limit with that. And really listen to you and not just prescribe medications, or when you're telling them that you're having problems with the medications, for them to really look deep into the side effects and try to prescribe you something that is tailored to you, because I know a lot of people do have issues with medication. And so just feeling like you're heard from and understood when you're going to a provider. And a lot of times it's not enough providers for the diverse community that we have for people to be able to see. Sometimes it's just only one person that you're seeing, of one, culture. And so just having a diversity of providers, I think also helps to understand each community. But I think also kind of shifting the way that we look at mental health and try to do it in a holistic way where we're actually helping people self-regulate and not always depending on medication or therapists, but being able to have the cues in your body, understand the cues in your body when you're starting to feel anxious, and using meditation and breathing and just, holistic ways of trying to regulate your own mental health, I think will open up the doors a little better, because I know that we are short on providers when it comes to mental health as well. So sometimes they get just as drained. So just trying to shift the way that we have tailored mental health for years into a different, more better, broader aspect.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Linda, I'm assuming that your community has different concerns when it comes to addressing mental health treatment. Can you expand a little on that?
Yeah, I would actually say that some of the concerns that everyone else has brought up are actually very similar within AAPI communities. I think while I think that stigma and like our perception of help seeking is still probably our foremost concern, and one of the biggest reasons I personally think for why Asians or API in general is the racial group that is least likely to seek mental health services. I do think that there are a lot of other barriers, and I think I think one thing that people often assume is that Asian Americans have or are financially better well off, but that's not necessarily true. I think, right, we are not a monolith, and I do think while some ethnicities are economically or are maybe in a more economically privileged place, I do think there are several ethnicities that are also generally have more low income populations as well. So I think that's one concern, and also, lack of insurance as a result, no knowledge about how to go about getting insurance. I think other things that people have also brought up are also similar for APIs. I think the fact that we just don't have enough API therapists around. I think there's a statistic going around that says that there are around 3% of the whole psychology workforce in the US it identifies as API. And that's just ridiculously low, considering that we actually represent around 7% of the country's whole population. So that's like just half as much as where we probably should be, or hopefully even more. But so I think statistics like that make me concerned. And then I think also similar to what people have said before, I think particularly what Amanda said about language barriers, I think is another huge thing as well, right? Because APIs represent such a huge population and have just a wide variety of languages that we speak, as well as a lot of differences in the ways that we speak those languages as well. And there are just not enough providers around who can speak in those languages or even understand. And finding interpreters similarly can also be really tough as well. So,
yeah. Well, I'm going to take a second to just let all the attendees know that there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll take a few minutes at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions for the panel, you can type it there and we'll be able to see it and get to that towards the end of our hour here. But we've already touched on this a little bit, but I want us to discuss cultural competency for a bit. The graphic that's now on the screen shows kind of a continuum of cultural competency, displaying a range of engagement and understanding of people from other cultural backgrounds. As you can see, it goes from basically forced assimilation to a proficiency on the opposite side of the spectrum. And so obviously our goal in the mental health community is to move the scale from left to right. I'll provide a graphic for all the attendees after this, but I wanted to just get you guys to take turns describing what cultural competency means to you and why it's so crucial for your individual communities. Lorraine, how about we start with you this time?
Okay, sure. Let's see. Cultural competency to me is being able to work effectively with people from different cultural backgrounds. Um, competency gives us knowledge that can help us understand the people that we work with, that whether it's in an organization or in our community, but it helps us to understand one another. And I think is crucial. It is, and it helps us build, and um, even helps us to connect where we can begin to trust one another. We can talk to one another and now understand why we do think and say things the way we do, because we're now looking at this person's culture versus just looking at them just as an individual. Now we're understanding why. Um, I teach sixth grade social studies, and we did a lesson, and and I was telling them we were talking about Muslims, and the way the women dress, and we had students in the school like that, and once we learned and the students learned why the women dress the way they do, they begin to look at the other students differently, and not make smart remarks, not laugh at them, because now they had an understanding of their culture. And I think that's what we need to do as individuals, and beginning to understand one another's culture so we can get along better and help one another.
Yeah, thank you. Sierra?
So I think cultural competency is to get every culture to understand the difference between one another, and to break the barriers of feeling like because you're from one culture, you can't relate to the next culture or understand what they've been through. And so I think when it comes to like the larger organizations and communities, when it comes to work and working with the community and being in community, you have to break those barriers of only one culture, so be with one culture or work with one culture, and getting rid of the biases throughout the community so that everybody can work effectively and efficiently.
Yeah. Linda, how about you?
Yeah, I think the way that I've heard cultural competency kind of described to me is as a quote unquote social fluency, which I like that phrase because I don't know, I guess I like comparing it to like learning another language in the sense that you're learning something completely different and maybe feels foreign to you. But similar to what other people have said, in the same sense that cultural competency overall focuses on understanding other people's cultures that are different from your own, and not only understanding them but hopefully honoring them in a way, and how they might be different in terms of their mindsets or in terms of their practices. And
Yes.
I actually feel like I've been moving away a little bit from that term overall, though. Cultural competency, I do like the graphic that you have here that has like a spectrum or continuum of cultural competency. But I think that like oftentimes when that word gets thrown around, it to me it feels sometimes like, oh, you're either culturally competent or incompetent. Like it's there's a firm line between where you are and where you aren't. And I personally have been more trying to advocate more for the term cultural humility, which I like a little bit more. Because I think competency, like I said, sort of shows like this, you're competent, you're incompetent. And it kind of implies once you're in the competent set, like on the competent side, you've mastered it all. You know everything. You understand all cultures in the world. Which realistically is not going to be true. I think that like as humans, we're going to constantly be trying to be more self-aware, trying to understand our own biases, and trying to, get to understand the multitude of different ways that cultures sort of express themselves. And so that's what I like about cultural humility, because I think that it does have that emphasis in a way of recognizing, your own flaws in understanding other cultures, but yet still being humble about trying to learn about other cultures as well. So, but yeah, I would say overall, definitely agree with like what others have said about, that it's incredibly important, right, to be either culturally competent or culturally humble, whatever you want to call it, in order to, you know, better provide care for that person in the end, because it plays such a big role in their identity in the long run, in the ways that they communicate and in the ways that they seek help as well.
Thank you. Amanda, I'd love to get a provider's perspective on this term. I'm sure that you work with this all the time.
So this is the first time I'm hearing cultural fluency, and I'm just still digesting that. I love that because I personally have a huge issue with the idea of cultural competence. Because one, you're either competent or incompetent, like Linda said, but on top of that, I can never be competent in someone's culture who is, Chinese American, right? Because then I'm making several like stereotypes, several biases, several things that are making me see Linda as an Asian American, not as Linda. And it takes away from who she is as a person, how she's grown up, what she does that does not ascribe to like what her parents did growing up, or what her grandma said, or what all of these other factors are. It steals from the uniqueness that exists between every person, because people are people and we're all going to be a little different. I think it's a good like 101 step, right? Like, let's talk about being culturally competent in kind of moving toward understanding each other on a continuum, because we'll never be culturally proficient, because cultures are constantly changing. That's why I'm like really digesting that word cultural fluency, because I think that that's perfect, because we have slang terms, cultures, words, language changes so often, the same as our cultures change. So I think that that's really beautiful. And I'm a huge advocate for cultural humility and learning as much as you can. So I can say, hey, this is what I know about kind of the existence of you in this world from this historical perspective. Can you tell me what is true about that for you? Can you tell me how that interacts for you? Can you tell me if I'm just completely full of it? And that is completely fine, because I am trying to learn about you. I'm genuinely interested in you as a person, and how the way you grew up plays into how you show up in the world. And I think that that's really what this conversation is about, what we're really trying to distill down to. How can I support you, know about you and how you fit into the world, so I can really honor whatever relationship we're in? If it is a coworker relationship, how can I honor you by knowing, hey, you have these important festivals or these important ceremonies and important things happening in your community that you might have access to, you might not have access to, or you just are feeling some sort of way about. Or maybe you just don't. Maybe it's not a thing for you, and that's completely fine. I just want to be able to show up for you so that we can be people existing in this space and support one another. I think there's so many layers to cultural competency that like this could be its own like 3-day workshop in and of itself. So
Right.
I'm just going to stop right there, because I could get on the roll and talk about this forever.
Well, I actually want to stay with you for our next question, because I want to find out kind of what your clients might be seeking when they come to you specifically for the kind of, care that you structure your practice kind of to meet needs of a specific community or a couple of specific communities. And I wanted to know kind of, what do you think your clients are coming to you hoping to receive as far as additional understanding that they may not get from another therapist? And I'll rephrase the question for the others, but I kind of want to start with you on that one.
Yeah. So my clients, we focus on the Latinx community, but then also lots of other communities come to us. And it's primarily immigrant communities. And they seek us out specifically, one, because they know that there's going to be less conversations about like documentation status or like collecting certain information. It's just something that we just don't do, and it feels a little safer. And two, because I work primarily with like BIPOC communities, Latinx communities, people are showing up in crisis
Mm.
because it is the straw that broke the camel's back. It is my last resort. It is, this is going to happen. I'm in crisis because, as we can tell through the rest of this conversation, BIPOC communities don't reach out for help unless it's absolutely necessary and they've exhausted every other resource. So we tend to come in a crisis space. And then once we manage the crisis, we kind of talk about like, hey, you know that suffering isn't mandatory. Like, you're carrying a lot on your back. You don't have to. And this might be the first time you've ever heard that you don't have to. And we can work on getting some of those rocks off of your back. We can work on setting up boundaries and like teaching you that that's a word and that you're allowed to have boundaries with like your family or with your like extended family. You're allowed to have boundaries. Those tend to be the first themes, and just like stabilization, boundary setting, and then saying, hey, you know, you don't have to live in this crisis moment for the rest of your life, and we can work on that.
Yeah, excellent. I want to hear from the others about kind of, you know, what your understanding is of what a provider could, like, what kind of understanding of your cultural background would you want a provider to have, or is that necessary? But it sounds like, you know, that a lot of these communities are kind of lacking providers that are, you know, in them with the people that they're trying to serve. So I just kind of want to get a feel for, you know, if you're seeking out a mental health provider, what do you think your community is especially looking for from that provider for them to feel safe, like they can seek out treatment? Let's start with Lorraine. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
I would say they're looking for a connection. They're looking for someone to say, um, I understand, because they do understand their background. And then let's say that it's not an African American provider, okay, that they're going to see. They want that provider to have some knowledge of
Mhm.
their background, of their community, of their community's need, um, and knowing how to reach that need. And I think it'll make a big difference if I'm talking to you and you have some type of education on my background and where I'm from, my culture. That's going to make a big difference. I'm going to put my guard down because there's going to be some type of trust, because I see that you went out your way to learn about my culture so that you can help me. And I think that makes a big difference. And I feel safe in saying that the African American community would be looking for a connection, someone who knows their culture, their background, and willing to listen and not say, oh, that happened back then, or, make justifications, but just listen, and understand.
Yeah. Sierra, do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that I actually faced was just like true understanding of what I was going through, and to actually help me break down and process what I went through. I know a big help that I had was my counselor when I was in group therapy. She really understood what I was going through and was like, you know what, you have PTSD. The doctor didn't diagnosed me, she did. And it's because she was looking at the signs and, how I was acting, and the thing, like the activities that we would do, my answers. So she was really like paying attention to what was going on. So just really understanding your patient and understanding, what they've been through in their childhood and their background and why they are where they are today, and just try to help them get past that.
Yes.
I actually was able, my psychologist was not, I didn't gel with him at all. I felt like I was just in there, and he was just like, well, how's the medicine? And so it was just really about the medicine. It wasn't about, what I was experiencing and what I was going through. And so he would send me on my way. But I did actually find a Black provider, and I really felt like he understood what I went through. I felt like I could tell him certain things and he wouldn't judge me. And so he was probably one of the best providers I had, and he really like worked with me and wasn't going to make me go back to work because he knew I wasn't ready to go back to work yet. And the other provider was going to send me back to work. And so just really understanding and being empathetic, I think is really important for seeking is
Empathetic, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Linda, what about you?
Yeah, I think I would definitely echo what everyone has been saying about, finding a provider who is empathetic and wants to better understand your culture and your sort of background overall. I would add on to that. I think it's really important though, for especially thinking about, my community and sometimes the difficulty that I think we might have with communication at times, that, I think it is better when, like, I guess rephrasing, thinking about like the reasons why I personally, when I went through my therapist journey, basically trying to find an appropriate therapist, the reasons why I ended up landing with an AAPI therapist in the end was right because I didn't have to explain. And I think it's something that it becomes a burden over time if you constantly have to explain your own cultural values.
Yes.
And that's why I think it's so important for providers to not only just be open to learning about cultures, but also actively seek out learning about those
Yes.
other cultures.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
like there's so many things that I like have to talk about, like I have to talk about the model minority myth again and anti-Asian hate and how I'm like traveling between these two lines when I just find a provider who already experiences that all the time. I'm like, they get it. And there are sometimes some other people who identify as a different race and still understand because I think they've made those efforts to understand. So I think that's truly what I ask for when I'm looking for providers, and what I think most of the community in general looks for when they're looking for providers as well.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about barriers of care, so I kind of want to end things on a positive note and talk about some action items that people watching or people already in kind of the mental health space can do to help these issues. And whether they're providers or advocates or trying to get involved, what are some like concrete things that people hearing this can be like, I want to help, I want to contribute to solving some of these problems? Sarah, why don't we start with you? Any ideas?
Like I said earlier, I think really trying to push people to a more self-regulation of mental health and doing it from a holistic standpoint. Holistic to me is a lot better. That's how I've kind of in my own way cured my mental health, because I wasn't able to find a provider, and sometimes you're just gonna be at that point or in that area, especially in rural areas, you can't find the provider that you are going to identify with. So you kind of have to be able to self-regulate your own mental health, use them as a tool, but still be able to self-regulate your own mental health when you're not able to get the access when it comes to insurance, or finding that right provider to to connect with and feel like you can really get the help that you need.
Yeah. Linda, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I've talked a little about in terms of like what providers can do about being more aware of their own implicit biases, being culturally humble, actively seeking out sort of how to better understand other cultures. I think that's definitely one thing. I think in terms of like just the general public, I think some things I think about are, one, just normalizing mental health in general. I think like even just simple conversation about your own mental health struggles, like, oh, I saw my therapist today or something, just like casually bringing that up sometimes makes a huge difference. I've noticed for some people about, oh, this person's just talking about therapy like it's a normal everyday thing. Like maybe it will be just a normal everyday thing for me too. Like maybe it's totally acceptable for me to go to therapy. So I think that's like definitely one thing towards counteracting the stigma against mental health in general. I think other things I think about though are just how important it is to be more politically involved. Because I think what happens is that, you know, a lot of these resources, we talk about a lot of these like barriers to care, and a lot of them are all resources that we lack, and we don't have the money to support all of them. And so what we really need is governmental support, is in my opinion, or more funding in general. And so I think like some ways to get involved are just being more politically active, in the sense of just being aware of what's going on in your community, like what bills are being passed, things like that. For example, at least thinking about like API mental health specifically, I know that Representative Judy Chu in California recently reintroduced this Stop Mental Health, or Stop Mental Health Stigma in Our Communities Act. And so things like that, just telling your like senator, your representatives, just being and sending them a letter and saying, hey, you know, I think this is really important. I really hope that you support this bill whenever it comes to a vote. So being more politically active, I think, actually does play a long role in terms of giving the, you know, community organizations that are already working on these amazing initiatives the money to continue working on these initiatives, and then also providing funding for research, which is another huge important thing as well.
Yeah. Amanda, you've touched on this a bit, but
I have a lot of things to say, and a lot of them echo what Linda just said, which is I profoundly believe, and I will shout this from the rooftops, that any BIPOC individual, BIPOC mental health is a political issue, because a lot of people in communities of any sort of color, any sort of difference, experience a lot of things based off of institutional racism and ways that our communities have been systemically attacked. So we have that. Most mental health research is done on that. We have like our data in the DSM-5 has been done on a very specific privileged population, usually white, mid-20s, early 30s, male from a middle-class background. And that is what we base all depression, anxiety, PTSD, what it looks like. PTSD in communities of color looks so different. Depression looks so different. You can see someone with some profound, serious depression and not clock it in the Latinx community. Why? Because he goes to work every single day. Goes to work every single day, still gets up, still washes themselves. They don't have that gross deterioration of functioning that you can see physically. There is no smell. Why? Because there are certain cultural things that are there that force them to do what they need to do. But do not get it twisted. That person is still profoundly and severely depressed. So we have some of those concerns. So when it comes to kind of what people in the community can do, one, from a provider point of view, like we need to be doing research. We need to be connecting with universities that are doing research so that we can get accurate information, accurate interventions for specific populations out there, because there's not enough. We don't have very specific language specific resources. We don't have very like specific research on Black mental health and how to communicate with certain communities. We just don't have enough. So even when you are informed as a provider, you don't have the appropriate resources, and you have to kind of figure it out as you go through your own cultural lens. And as someone who is a part of that community, it's hard to translate that knowledge to the next person because they don't have that lived experience. So if it is backed up with research, if it is backed up with these methods, it makes it easier for us to be able to really support the communities in ways that make sense. So we have that. We have civic involvement when it comes to governmental programs, such as in North Carolina, Medicaid does not cover undocumented people. If we change mental health, the conversation around mental health into a public health issue, because it is public health, then we will have much different conversations going forward. And I think that that is something that we really need to keep in the foreground. And we can do that in partnership with different community organizations, in partnership with NAMI, in partnership with the people and the places who are doing that good advocacy work, because mental health is holistic health, is community health. It's usually a pretty good barometer of what is going on in your community if everyone's mental health is going down the toilet.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know we wanted to end on a positive note. I just want to kind of do it.
No, that's okay. Lorraine, do you have anything to add?
I do, and I know for time's sake, I'm gonna keep it short. But so what I wanted to say was two things really, really quick. One, you guys talked a lot about the political side. So of course, with NAMI, I teach advocacy classes on how to reach and talk to your policymaker under 90 seconds, how to send an email, how to talk by phone, how to meet them in person, how to do an elevator speech. So if anybody is interested in that, go to the NAMI website, register for the class. The other thing I wanted to say was nothing is better than word of mouth. Nothing is better than word. No amount of advertisement is better than the word of mouth. Just a couple of weeks ago, the gas station that was giving away the gas at 73 cents a gallon. Word of mouth, social media, and it spread it like wildfire, like wildfire. Okay, spread the word. Encourage your friends, your family, your coworkers. Have that talk. Help break the stigma of mental health. Let people know that it's a disease. It's a disease. People do not wake up just to act a certain way or be a certain way. They sincerely cannot help it. It's a disease. Let people know that they're not alone. Get involved, advocate, research, join a group, look for resources. Okay, NAMI is one of the, and I'm not being biased, but NAMI is one of the best organizations that you can partner with, that you can get involved with. We have everything. And the best thing about NAMI, especially in communities, is everything is free. You got support groups, you got education classes, you got training, you become a member, and NAMI is a great place for resources. So just know that you're not alone. And we have to start spreading the word. We have to start telling people that it's okay. It's okay. Nothing's wrong with you. And we have to break this stigma. And we have to call it what it is, a disease. We have to treat it as though somebody came to us and said, look, I just found out that I'm a diabetic. I just found out I have cancer. I want to be able to come up to you and say, I just left my doctor and he said, I have depression. He says that I'm schizophrenic. We have to be able to have this talk and be okay with it. So I want to leave you with just spread the word. Spread the word, spread the love, and be that for somebody that you want somebody to be to you.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, we had a couple of questions, but I think for time's sake, if that's okay, I'm going to give these to the panelists after the fact and just see if we have any additional thoughts on this. I will say that all of the attendees are going to receive some additional resources after we're finished here, along with a certificate for some CEU credits. So does anybody else have anything that they would like to add before we wrap up our conversation today? Well, I wanted, yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say that this is just an ongoing conversation that we just need to continue to have because there's a lot of energy around it.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you all for being present and willing to speak on your experiences. I think that's the way that we really keep starting these conversations is to make obvious that there are people behind the statistics, people whose mental health needs need to be met, regardless as to where they're coming from or what their background and experiences have been. And NAMI is definitely dedicated to the fight to make mental health more accessible for all people. So if you'd
Yes.
like more information on the things that we're doing, please feel free to visit our website, to look at some of the resources, to join us for local events, check out what your local affiliate is doing and become a part of that. If you have any
Yes.
questions, reach out to us. We'd be happy to get you involved. But Amanda's right. This is an ongoing conversation, and we hope to have more of these in the future. If you enjoyed this, we're going to be sending out a survey. Please give us some feedback. We'd love to do more of this type of conversation, whether on minority mental health specifically or other mental health areas of interest. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended. Thank you so
Thank
much to
you.
our panelists. You guys
Thank
were
you.
amazing.
Thank
We will
you.
be doing things like this again. So we hope that all of you will join us. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.